The following video was sponsored by the Greek American Heritage Society of Philadelphia, preserving and promoting our community's history.
Our guest today is the spiritual leader of the newest and one of the most beautiful Greek Orthodox churches in the Delaware Valley. However, those roots stem back all the way to 1981. Let's meet our guest, as we said. Welcome to Cosmos Philly, Father Peter Thornberg.
Lefteri, thank you for being here. Christos Anesti.
Alithos o Kyrios.
I'm really happy to have you all here. It's an honor for me that you asked me to be part of this series. But we're grateful here at St. Sophia to have you all with us.
Well, thank you so much. Let's first talk about your name. I mean, we're a Greek Orthodox community. It's not a very common name, Thornberg. Let's get that out. Let's let people know how that name came to be.
My father's father was the Xeno, as we say. So I'm third generation Greek American and probably 12th generation German, Scotch, Irish, whatever my grandfather was a mix of. So that's how Thornberg came into being. But my father was baptized and raised in the Greek Orthodox Church in St. Constantine Helen in Washington, D.C. And my mother was full Greek and born and raised at St. Sophia, and a cathedral in Washington, D.C., sort of like the competing churches. But St. Constantine Helen won out because when my parents got married, then he brought my mom over to the light side. I won't say the dark side, but yeah. So that's how it happened.
Well, your ancestry then, 3-4 generations. Obviously, it's Greek, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about it. How your ancestors, what part of Greece they're from, how they got here.
So on Dad's side, his grandfather was from a village called Kastraki, which is right at the base of the Great Meteora, and Kalambaka has now sort of grown and overtaken Kastraki. And then his grandmother was from Volos, the port city. But also she had lived in Alexandria for quite a while in Egypt. And then on my mother's side, her father's parents were from Sparta. And then on her mother's side, Corinth and Thessaloniki. So I got all of Stena Alada, like in part of my soy, as we say. They all great-grandparents came here for a better life. My father's grandfather came first single and lived in Lowell, Mass, working in one of the factories there. Then when the Balkan Wars broke out, like most single young men of Greek heritage, they all went back to fight in the Balkan Wars. We actually have a picture of my grandfather that all the cousins, well, our cousins, his grandchildren, great-grandchildren, have of him and his tsolya in Larissa. So it's kind of a neat thing, to see that when you go through all these Greek school programs and or you tell the boys, be proud of wearing the tsolya, you actually have to have a great grandfather who wore that as in his service to the king at the time. I actually have his orders, his orkos, I think they call it in Greek, from 1913.
Wow.
So I don't know how I ended up with it, but
chosen son.
Yeah, there actually says somewhere in here has the stamp with the seal of the King of Greece, who was, I guess, the commander-in-chief of the army. So they have that, and like I said, both. So then, backtracking, he met my great-grandmother, which was a mixed marriage. He's from Kastraki, she was from Volos. His mom was not happy that he didn't marry. Yeah, back then that was a mixed marriage. And but they made it work. Gosh, they were married till both. My grandfather was in his 90s when he passed first, so they were married for over 60 years.
Good chromosomes.
Oh yeah, yeah, Karta, that's right. And then my mother's family, the same sort of story. Actually, it's kind of interesting on her father's side. When they first came to this country, they went to Savannah, Georgia, and the Klan ran them out.
Wow.
So when AHEPA was getting started, you know, my grandfather, as a young kid, was experiencing that reason for why AHEPA got started, because the Klan was, you know, discriminated against anybody who was not white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So and the Greeks fell into that category. So they emigrated, or moved, I should say, up to Asbury Park, New Jersey, which is where he kind of grew up. And then eventually somehow made his way down to DC, met my grandmother, they got married. Same thing with my, you know, with my father's grandparents. Went from Massachusetts to Beckley, West Virginia, to Washington, D.C. as work moved. And both sides were involved in restaurants.
Greeks in restaurants.
Yeah.
How ironic, huh? Now, did you know your grandparents? Were you close to them? Or what was your relationship?
I knew my great-grandparents. I knew both my father's grandparents and my mother's grandmother, her mother's mother. Everyone else had died relatively young, you know, coming to this country. But that was a great blessing. They spoke a little bit of English. I spoke a little bit of Greek, but, you know, love doesn't know any boundary. And so they used to watch us at various times, you know, and spoil us to death. And then, of course, my grandparents, I knew all my grandparents.
When we spoke earlier, you mentioned people of that generation, and the question I wanted to pose to you directly related is, what did you get from your grandparents and that generation? You mentioned it earlier about the church, their devotion. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Certainly. Owning restaurants meant that they weren't always at church, from what I heard from my father, but they were committed totally to the church. Whenever there was, both St. Sophia and St. Constantine Helen went through building programs, building new churches, and they supported those without question. They went to church as much as they could. I think that they also kept that ethos in their households as well. Everybody was welcome. You worked hard. Nothing was given to you. So that carried over to their grandchildren, my parents, and then our parents inculcated that to us. I remember growing up, we were one of the last families to leave church on a Sunday. You know, Dad was on parish council, Mom was PTO, both parents taught Sunday school. Same with my wife's family. They were all very active at the parish in El Paso. I remember festival time, it was like torture. I mean that in a good way, because my dad was the head of the lamb crew, and I was brought to do this.
Is that a real title? Head of the lamb crew? Do you have a portrait of him with the lamb?
You know, many of the churches, I think Bustleton Avenue and St. Demetrius Upper Darby are probably one of the few churches that still roast the lambs as part of their festivals. Well, you used to have a pit with at least 15 lambs going at once. So they needed a little kid with small fingers to clean out the bolts.
That was you?
That was me. 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning, dragged down to, I shouldn't say dragged, but.
Have you shared this story with your parishioners?
Oh, yeah.
They know this about you.
That's part of why they see me in the kitchen. I mean, we didn't just show up to festival to eat. We were there to work. And there was no option. I mean, Mom and Dad were like, get in the car, you're going down with your dad. I could get an early release, you know, because it was like 6 in the morning to go down to get the lambs ready. And there were a bunch of other people, it wasn't just us. But the reward was the little yayades would be making the crema for the caldo, and it could barely reach the top of the pot. So they saw this high school kid who was taller than them. They say, "Panayoti helado." And so I knew I was bound for more work. But the reward was they gave me that fresh crema as breakfast. And I could have free reign of any of the gliquismata because they knew that we were there working for the church. So it was a win-win for everybody. But it certainly left its mark. I mean, that, and of course, you know, serving in the church, our priests always encouraged us to serve in the altar. You know, I think that's part of the reason why the calling was sort of easy to answer, because we were just involved in the church life, you know, and all the aspects of it.
That's what leads me to the next question. It's obvious, or more evident, that your your past, your childhood, and your youth revolved around your faith, orthodoxy. Do you remember the specific moment? Was there a specific moment, or did it gradually come?
Gradual. You know, I was always enamored with serving in the altar. I felt like it felt like home for me. It was never like a what do you say, angaria, you know, being forced to do it. I love to do it. I think that was part of it. Certainly family life. I mean, you know, growing up, we were allowed to do non-church related things. I was in scouting. Like I said, we didn't have the scout troop that they had in the past at the church. But, you know, boys club soccer, softball, whatever, baseball, whatever, you know, we did as kids. But the church always had a big part in our life. And when there was something at the church, everything else was secondary. I mean, that's just the way my parents were. Was it easy? No, not all the time. But, I mean, that was the way we were raised. I think pretty much a lot of my contemporaries were raised that the church was the focal point. You know, a lot of the stuff with the Xeni were like kind of frowned upon, like you didn't, you know. But I think, you know, just that message that my parents sent us was that the church, not just in words but in actions. I mean,
it just seems a little second, third, fourth generation. You generally don't hear that.
Yeah, you don't. It doesn't.
But now, I mean,
it doesn't usually carry out that far. I mean, that's because the enculturation. I mean, that's we maintain our Greek Orthodox faith, our Hellenic heritage, but the goal was to become part of the American society.
Let's segue over to your childhood and your academic history and how you got into the priesthood. Could you just give us a...
So our church had a parochial school, so went up to 6th grade, so we had Greek every day, first class of the day. So when I hear kids complain about Greek school, I said, be quiet, don't complain. I said, because either you went like we did daily or you went Saturday morning. I mean, now at least these kids go, you know, weekdays. You know, some I know the churches do it Saturday, but we had it just, you know, every day was part of our curriculum and religion. So I think that all played part in the whole, what made me me. Middle school, high school, went to the local Catholic schools. College, I went to the University of Maryland, studied biology. Like every Greek parent, I used to say yatros. So I studied biology, which I think in the long run really helped me in this role that I have now. And then the calling really like came like almost like a wave, a tidal wave, because I had just been ignoring it for so long. And then I went to my priest first and I said, I think I want to go to seminary. He's like, all right, well, you got to tell your parents. Whew. But as soon as I told them, they were like, okay, so let's go. And they were very supportive. I mean, my dad was kind of like, are you sure this is what you wanted to do? Because I think, you know, serving on parish councils and know how parishes work and how to, you know, all the things that went with it. But 100% behind me, 100%.
Well, let's talk about what happened following seminary, your career and your path that brought you here to Philadelphia.
Sure. So while I was in seminary, I met my wife, Presbytera Catherine, and we dated for several years. And then the year that I graduated, actually we both graduated graduate school. I finished in the spring of 2002, and we got married October 13th, 2002.
Back in Washington, where you're from?
In El Paso, Texas, where Presbytera is from.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's another story.
That's another story. So when we got married, we moved to Baltimore. I was hired as a lay assistant for the Annunciation Cathedral, and I worked with Father Dean Morales, who is the dean of the cathedral, and we were there for 4 years. While I was working at the cathedral, Presbytera worked for John Hopkins and their Department of Education with Head Start. While we were there, our daughter Sophia was born, and I served as a deacon and then as a priest for 1.5 years. As a deacon, I also served with His Eminence Metropolitan of Angelos on weekends with him to various visitations to the other parishes. And then, so that was in November of 2004, ordained as a deacon. And then in June of 2005, I was ordained as a priest by His Eminence at the cathedral in Baltimore. And we served there, a wonderful time we had there. And then His Eminence said, okay, I need you to go somewhere. And it was here, St. Sophia. And so when I came here...
Were you familiar with this church or this community at all?
Only through the website of the parish, because I knew that they were planning on building a new church. And so that always excited me. Wow, the parish gets an opportunity to build a new church. And at that time, Father Jimmy Pavlo was the Proistamenos here, who's now in Trenton. So I knew him from before. And so I was just following what was going on here. Little did I know that this is where I was getting assigned. So when His Eminence told me that I was coming here, I knew I had my work cut out for me. Just because building a church is, at that point I only imagine how much work, but how exciting it would be to be able to, help to build a house of worship. But I came here, and October the 1st of 2006 was my start date, and a beautiful parish. My first day I had a baptism. I had no clue who anybody was, but not of like humano.
What was that like for you?
It was awesome. I mean, like awesome and sort of like overwhelming, to have your first Sunday liturgy followed up by baptism. And now you see these, kids are like almost adults, or young adults now. You see, I've married some of my Goyans from here and from Baltimore, so that kind of like either adds or you lose another hair, but for a good reason, because it makes you realize that something stuck, that they actually choose to get married in the church first and foremost, because today's day and age everybody wants to get married in the forest or in the beach or somewhere. Not that God hasn't created them, but for these young people to say, I want you to do it, and I want to do it in the church, is huge for us as a priest, especially in today's day and age, where you're combating that.
How long has it been now?
So October of 2006. So we're 19. So we're going on 13 years.
And what does the future hold for? No, before we go there, what did you? There must have been a lesson or two that you got out of these 13 years here. You must have a great learning patience.
Especially with the church project. I think just because there were so many ideas and opinions going into it, that it took us a while to finally settle on what we wanted to do. And I think we did pretty well. And this didn't happen overnight. I mean, this parish... worked very hard.
Did you ever?
They had leadership, both lay and clergy, that worked really hard. They were blessed that they retired clergy came here to serve this community, so whatever was raised could be set aside for the future building of this building.
Was there ever any doubt that this wonderful place? Yeah.
I would say doubt as to what would be built.
What would be built more?
Not that it wouldn't be built, but what?
But you saw it coming. It was inevitable.
It had to. Well, first of all, His Eminence said to the community, I sent Father Peter here to build a church with you. If you're not going to do it, I'm going to put him somewhere else.
I mean, this is sort of the northwestern.
We are the furthest west in this region. So, like, to go from, I would say, from us to Wildwood or to Egg Harbor Township is 2 hours. Because I know, like, when we do the clergy meetings and we alternate, so that when Father George Leokopoulos comes here or I go to his parish, it's roughly 2 hours. Especially traffic. I mean, this area coming through, if you drive up 422, 76, the Blue Route, it all like combines here. But it's a blessing too, I think, because it means we're in a vibrant, growing area. We still have like the core families that were the founders of the parish, but we are growing into transplants, people that grew up in Upper Darby, or people that grew up in other parts of the U.S. that have come here for work, pharmaceuticals and industry of various types, government even. So we're sort of like a a melting pot of backgrounds.
Well, if we could throw something out, is there a specific thing people don't know about this church that we should mention? You know, is there a thought here? I'm still overwhelmed by the iconography every time I come in here.
I would say that as with all of our parishes, don't doubt the power of the Holy Spirit, because on paper this should never have happened. I mean, we were at under 200 families when we took this on. We had a lot of support from within the parish, but also from without, from the Greek community at large. I mean, people were just excited to see a Byzantine edifice go up. You know, when a lot of people, especially Greeks from Greece, come up here and they see it from the outside, they say, you know, this looks like the church back home. You know, of course there are, when you come inside, there's modern adaptations, you know, because of architectural techniques and the use of steel, and you don't see it, but, you know, it looks a little different than from Yaya's Papu's church in the Koryo. But, you know, they say, what is that word, Singenithika, you know, they feel like at home as they approach it, you know, because they see, like, we made that effort to make the style reflect something that you would see back in Greece.
Well, let's talk about the church a little further. It happened, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, April of 2012?
Yep. You guys were here, part of it.
Do you remember the moment you were up above and the cross was going in?
Scared to death.
I was going to say, is that what was going on in your head that very moment?
Well, I'll tell you why. Because when we first put the steel in, there's a beam that goes right over the altar. You can't see it because the Annunciation icon is covering it. But we all signed it. And there was a point, someone asked, well, what about those people who aren't here? You know, the names of those who died, who had this as their dream. And I said, okay, well, we'll write it down, and we'll get a guy on the lift, take me up, we'll put it on there. Well, that lift, you felt everything. So when they told me, well, you're going to go up on that crane almost, the lift to put the cross on, I had these flashbacks to that, you know, everything swaying like this. Well, that one, you didn't feel a thing. You just had to get over the fact I had to put a full harness on, strap into the...
you look like you were ready to jump out of a plane with
and
that.
They asked me that, so when we got up, so we actually had to go higher than the dome, like for sort of like the approach, and then lower the basket, you know, or where we were standing, to the base of the dome. And the contractor goes, Father, you want to get out? I'm like, no, I'm really comfortable staying right here. But, you know, there's pictures to show you like a hand on it. That was something I'll never forget.
Looking out over the sea of people. What were you thinking right then and there? Was it just overwhelming?
It was overwhelming. I think it meant, I think, a lot to me as the leader of this parish, for people who had worked so hard for so many years to make this a reality. You know, there were some people who didn't make it. There were some people who literally walked into the doors, unfinished floor, to see it, and then passed, you know, before this was open. But it was very moving to be a part of that, to know that, you know, you don't get that opportunity, you know, often. I know Father John Limbarakis, my predecessor here, one of the priests that served this parish, he built 3 other communities. I don't know how he did it, because doing one church edifice is a lot of work. But that's a testimony to that generation of clergy, the first priests to serve this country, you know, where they went to 15 different parishes during their ministry. They did the impossible. And we also had Father Constantine Andrews, who was the priest at St. Demetrius, who helped a lot here as well. Yeah, he just passed away, 102, I think. But, you know, we also had, you know, Father Katerlis in the community of St. George, where a lot of these people went for. I mean, can you imagine driving from Norristown to Center City, Philadelphia, before the Blue Route 76, I mean, Ridge Avenue the whole way. I mean, literally an all-day affair to go to church. So, you know, St. George helped us. I think the font that we have was from the Elkins Park community. So that, you know, every parish, you know, helped us in a way. And so when other parishes look for help from us, you can't say no. I mean, I know that one of our parishioners who grew up in Bustleton Avenue, who donated the Stacidia for that we used to have here. Well, when we got all new furniture, everything had to match. So I said to Father Alexandros, I said, can you all use this? And they did. I think it's still there. So when a church asks for help, who are we to say no? Because we were helped by so many people.
Give us a little idea about the future of this congregation, and I don't want to really talk about growth, but I think if we look around here, we've got a large facility. There's a hall that we're using. The church is now pretty much done, I think.
No, yes. We are excuse me, we are finished with the beautification. That took about 5.5 years. So I think the next thing is us to give some TLC to the Maracas Cultural Center. We're redoing the parking lot. I don't know if you saw that when you came in the back. Things need to be done for that building, but eventually there's a plan to connect the two buildings as the growth requires it. We're slowly growing. I think that's better so that we can develop ministry to meet the needs of the people. And I think that's like with every parish. I think we're lucky in a way that we're not seeing a downturn versus like so many churches, not just the Orthodox, but are seeing. I think ours, in part because of the richness of Orthodoxy and the richness of our Hellenic heritage. To embrace Hellenism doesn't mean that you have to be Greek. It's the ideals of Hellenism that we talk about at the three hierarchs celebrations. Education, philotimo, all these attributes that are foundation for our communities are embraced by people when they come from outside of the faith. Obviously the couple that you met, it's a mixed couple, but like they're the bride is sort of like enamored with all the richness of our faith and having a culture like ours. Doesn't mean that we extinguish another culture for it, but it means that we embrace it and share it with others.
Let's talk a little bit about specific times of the year where you really love being part of this community that really stand out to you. I think the festival's obviously one of them because I've seen you, okay, you have 2 left feet when you try, but you like to get out there and dance with the kids, That's wonderful. What does the festival mean to you?
The festival means community. It's a lot of work. Don't be misled by, today they were making pasta flora in a limited supply because in a small parish, the work just seems a lot more. We do 2 festivals and a craft fair, in part because to fund the mortgage on this building. We would love to get rid of the second festival, just because Vasily, they take up a lot of time and commitment. But they are a celebration of our homogenia. It brings, exposes us to people who otherwise may not be exposed to the Greek community, the Orthodox faith. Everybody comes into this church. There's huge groups that come in, to see, and who always comment on how they've watched it grow from the ground up. But the festivals are a wonderful celebration. I do put on a bodya. That's part of how I was raised.
With that.
You don't sit by and watch other people work when you're certainly capable of doing it. Now I don't do a lot like I used to. But I still think it's important that myself, I can't say what other clergy do, is to show your people that you're leading them together, and that you're not above washing pans, serving spanakopita. I'm not so good at that part. Like I see the butcher.
Who does the cooking at home with you guys?
Oh, Presbytera. I help somewhat, but Presbytera.
Just figured maybe she's got you in the backyard once in a while.
Yeah, no, she does the majority of it, and I help as much as I can. But we're all here at the festival. All the families are here to some level to do the work. You asked, my favorite time of the year is Pascha. Just because the beauty of Holy Week, even though sometimes I lose my voice, but it's the services. I mean, that time you see still the remnants of the flowers. Christmas, obviously, the 15 days of August, being a Panayoti, I'm a little biased, but we all have that feeling for the Panagia. that especially at that time of year. It is prime barbecue season, but so we have to fast. So that's a temptation, but it's worth it. I mean, it's just those times that it brings us together as a family.
With all this time invested in the church, the community, your faith, I'm sure there's a cot back there, as I said earlier. But what do you do to get away? What is your leisure life like?
Well, first and foremost, I have to carve out a day to take off. Sometimes it's not always the same day of the week. I learned that from my Proistamenos. It's hard because there's always going to be something that needs your attention. But I try to take one day out of the week, off as much as I can. A lot of times I just like to veg. I like to read, walk, just a little bit of exercise. I'm not the greatest athlete in the world, but you do have to do stuff to keep your body, because St. Paul says it's the temple of the Holy Spirit. So not just the prayer life, but also physically doing things to keep your health. Because my yaya used to say, without your health, you have nothing. And it's so true. So I try to find ways to keep myself preoccupied. A lot of times if my daughter's off from school for a particular thing, I try to be off during that time. Doesn't always work out that way, as for most priests. We try to find things to let the mind relax.
Do you have a motto that you live by, or anything that there's a great line out there that you kind of say, that's my life, that's what I'm about, or that's how I want to live, or something? Or
I think as a priest, you always have to remember the entirety of Scripture, and that is to love and serve God. But I think the ancient Greeks had a very good saying, pan metron ariston, everything in moderation, so that we don't overdo certain things in our life, because we're going to get bombarded by so many things that we want to do, and you can't do it all. So I think as I've gotten older, I've learned that that's a very healthy and wise advice or saying from the ancient Greeks that just reminds us to, it's okay, you want to do that, but make sure you don't overload yourself.
Father Peter Thornberg, thank you for talking with us. We wish you nothing but the best of luck in the future with your congregation in this wonderful church.
Teddy, thank you. I just want to leave with just one last thought. For those of us, who are a Greek by birth or by enculturation, Orthodox from a young child, or come into Orthodoxy as an adult, to never lose the pride of being what we are. So, being Orthodox Christians first and foremost, being Orthodox Christians of a Hellenic background, and Orthodox Christians of all backgrounds, because our churches, you see it all over, we're embracing so many people, but to never lose not the arrogant pride, but the pride that comes from within about being who you are, as being, Orthodox Christians of Greek, of Hellenic heritage, to continue that with joy, to be proud and not to shy away from, when people ask you what your background is. Father Gregory and myself had a little bit of a struggle to explain Gilbert and Thornberg as being Greeks, but I think it makes for a good law firm. It's what's in here and what drives this to celebrate. Thank you guys so much for coming out. Christos Anesti.
Alithos o Kyrios.
For more information about sponsoring or viewing the interview series, visit the Greek American Heritage Society of Philadelphia online at gahsp.org.